Good evening, lovers of wisdom and seekers of knowledge and understanding, and welcome again to The Sacred Life. I'm your host, David Baylor, and tonight I will be leading you down the long and twisting path to uncover the forgotten secrets behind a well-known but often misunderstood chapter of Christian history, and reveal to you the forgotten stories behind the Anabaptists, revealing long-forgotten tales that even their own descendants today have forgotten. Perhaps the greatest tragedy of the Anabaptists today is that they have forgotten their own stories, and in the end have come to believe the myths, the stories, and even the lies invented by their enemies, by those who sought to discredit them and to destroy them. But we will bring these stories to light once again and tell you the story of the Anabaptist people that you're unlikely to hear in schools. Good evening, everybody. Once again, it's good to have you all here. Like I said, I'm your host, David Baylor. Tonight we're going to be talking about the story of the Anabaptists, and I guess I would say the true story. Like I said, the secret history of the Swiss Anabaptists, and it's not secret in the sense that the Anabaptists themselves are hiding it from you. I think in a lot of ways today, this is really, I come from an Anabaptist background. I grew up Mennonite, and this is like digging into the story of my own people. I find a lot of these things are things that we have forgotten. Or like I said, ways in which we have learned to believe a different version of our story. And I think that has had some extreme consequences for the Anabaptist people, for my own people. Just remind everybody, please check out the links down in the description of this video, of any of our videos, really. Find ways to support us. You can become a channel member if you enjoy this kind of content. This more historical content is it's my favorite thing to do. I like to have a variety here on The Sacred Life because there's a way in which all of these things relate to each other, and I think focusing too much on any one thing, I don't want to do that. But I like this historical content, but it takes a lot of time, a lot of research, a lot of effort to put together, and I've spent a lot of time throughout my life reading and researching these things. So if you appreciate these, of course, like this video, leave your comments. You're in the live chat or in the comment section if you're not watching this live. And please follow this channel, share this channel, help us to continue to grow. And thanks everybody for your support. Please consider becoming a channel member, dropping your super chats, things like that, if you appreciate what we're doing. And we'll remind everybody once again, I am also the sponsor for The Sacred Life, my iconography business. I am an Orthodox iconographer. Even though I grew up Anabaptist today, I'm an Orthodox Christian. You can check out the link for that in my description as well, Gregorius Iconography. Please consider purchasing some hand-painted icons or ordering some custom commissions. If you're going to be in the area of Dallas, Texas, in the middle of February, I'm planning, Lord willing, to be at the Orthodox Art Festival together with my teacher. So you come check us out there. So anyway, getting back into the topic of tonight's video. So the stories that we all tell about ourselves, about our people, our history, these things are very, very important. They shape how we understand ourselves, who we think ourselves to be, and how we encounter the world around us. When we pass down our stories about our history from one generation to the next, they are shaped and formed in such a way as to lead us in one direction or another. There's no way that we can really tell the full story in the sense that we can tell every little detail, every factor that goes into getting us from where we were to where we are now, and so on, because history is far, far too complicated. So when you're discussing something about what are the origins of the Anabaptists, we have an unfortunate tendency to be reductive. Unfortunate in some ways, but in other ways it's necessary. But the way in which we reduce that story is very, very important. And one of the things I want to present to you tonight is that there's something kind of insidious about the way in which Anabaptists, the story of the Anabaptists has been rewritten and retold, and this has had detrimental effects on the Anabaptist community. But there's also, I think, a warning for all of us in this. It's a great example for us to see what happens when you start meddling with your stories. This is something that modern culture has really really doing a lot of right now, meddling with our old stories, wanting to retell all these stories, reframe the narrative, and tell something different, and that's going to have consequences. It's going to reshape you, form a fundamentally different identity. And we have here in the example of the Anabaptist history, we have an example of how that has actually worked out, how that's actually happened, and what the consequences of that might be. So, again, like I said, there's no way we can actually ever possibly tell the full story because history is far too complicated for that. So, instead, we shape our stories in such a way as to lead the next generation towards the things that we want them to be led towards. And that's an important thing to consider when somebody's presenting a different version of history. There's always a motive, even if they themselves don't realize it. So we're going to tell our stories in such a way as to prioritize the things that we value. And that might not necessarily have any bearing on what is actually true. So when the descendants of the Swiss Anabaptists passed on their faith and their stories, the stories of their heroic struggles of their ancestors in the faith and in the flesh as well, when they passed down these stories to the subsequent generation, there was a particular way which they chose to tell the story. There are all kinds of things about the story. There are all kinds of different ways that they could have told the story. But there's a reason that they passed down the story in the way that they did. And I think it's very consequential that we've discarded that story today. On the one hand, you have groups like the Old Order Amish who just discarded any understanding or knowledge of their history entirely and stopped telling those stories, and instead became focused on we have to do the things that have been passed down to us. Um, and then on the other hand, you have the more mainstream Mennonite scholarship, which has completely discarded the old story and replaced it with something fundamentally different. So when the Swiss reformer Heinrich Bullinger, who was the successor in Zurich of Ulrich Zwingli, set down his own version of the story, he told a tale very, very different from what the Anabaptists had to say about themselves. And this is, if you've heard anything or studied anything about Anabaptist history, more likely than not, this is the version of the story that you have learned, this version that Heinrich Bullinger wrote down. That this is true whether or not you are an Anabaptist who has studied Anabaptist history, or whether you're somebody who has just studied like Reformation history, church history, or read about these things just kind of in general. So the Swiss Anabaptist movement, according to this version of the story, is something that started in 1525 as an offshoot of Zwingli's inner Reformation circle in Zurich. So there were three men, Conrad Grebel, Felix Mantz, and Georg Blaurock, who had all been like a part of Zwingli's inner circle, very close to Zwingli, part of this like Bible study group basically that he had going on in Zurich for years leading up to the Reformation. So these were people that he discussed these theological questions with, people who helped him formulate some of his fundamental ideas. So these people would have been close friends with Zwingli and probably also with Bullinger himself. But then they split away from Zwingli, thinking that on the one hand, he was moving too slowly and not making, you could say, not making strong enough reforms on certain things that they held to be important, and also that he was far too willing to compromise with the civil authorities in Zurich in order to get his Reformation through. And they thought there can be no compromise. And instead, this is again according to Bullinger's version of the story, that they needed to set out and take matters into their own hand. And so in 1525, these three men, and with a few others, baptized each other in what is often considered the first adult baptism of the Reformation era, and the beginning of the Anabaptist movement in Switzerland. And so you can imagine if this is true, which there's certainly an element of truth. The story in and of itself is true. This is an event that actually happened. I'm not challenging that. I don't think anybody does. And so you can imagine Bullinger's probably going to have some feelings about that. These friends of his that are now opposed to him and denouncing him and denouncing the church that he is essentially now the leader of after the death of Zwingli. But until very, very recently, this was not the story that the Anabaptists told about themselves and about their own origin. They had a very, very different, like I've said already, they had a very, very different story that they were telling. But this is, again, like I've said already, one that they've almost entirely forgotten today. So you see what has happened for the most part is, like I've said, with some groups like Old Order Amish, I think this is also true of some Old Order Mennonites and others, they've either completely discarded any concern about their history, any knowledge of who they came from, where they came from, the stories of their ancestors, what their origins are, and they're just concerned with living. I mean, which is I mean, not in and of itself a bad idea to say we're concerned primarily with living out our faith, but the point I'm bringing out is they don't know anything about their own history. Um, but then on the other hand, mainstream scholarship has really pushed this narrative, like the narrative that I've expressed from Bollinger, and this in the 20th century was adopted, especially in the middle of the 20th century and about the 1950s, is wholeheartedly adopted by Anabaptist scholars, by Mennonite scholars, and this represents a dramatic shift. So it's like the old, you could say, like folk stories that the Anabaptists have to say about themselves. The older stories that we had about our own origins. Again, I say we because I come from this background. I'm a part of these people, even if I'm not a part of an Anabaptist community and an Anabaptist church today. I still consider this to be my people. This is my heritage. But so they've discarded these old stories, these are just legends, these are just folk tales, but they're not true. Here's the actual history. This is what the historians show. And so this must be what's true. And so this has been discarded in favor of what is more correct. But there's like a sad irony to this, and it perhaps hints as to why the Anabaptist world today is so much in, I guess I would just say it's in shambles. It's splintering rapidly, unraveling. Um, and in people, just like young people, increasingly disinterested either in the liberal Mennonite or the conservative Anabaptist settings in living in that world anymore, holding on to those beliefs or those practices anymore. And that irony is that, like, this story that was set forth by Bullinger that was once considered so scandalous that it completely discredited the Anabaptists in the eyes of the people. In the context of American Christianity in particular, has been embraced as something that is seen as heroic. Like these guys were the radicals, and now being radical, and that this is like a very American thing, that being the radical is seen like these are the most heroic people. Um, so now, what was the story, you're probably wondering, that the Anabaptists have to say about themselves? So this is something that kind of in my own personal exploration of church history and of the history of my own people, I really dug into this because, like, I'm aware there's a book. I should have brought the book so I could show it to you. There's a book written in the late 1800s, I think in the 1890s, by Ernst Müller, who was a reformed, like a minister of the Swiss Reformed Church in the Emmental, which was a region in Switzerland that was a major center for the Anabaptist movement in the canton of Bern. Still is home to a small Mennonite community today in Switzerland. So he was a reformed minister among these communities, and he collected these stories both from them and from the people around. And he challenged the narrative that was kind of like the officially accepted narrative of the of the canton of Bern, of the state historians, which was Bullinger's version of the story. He challenged this and said, like, this doesn't line up with the facts that I see on the ground, and it really doesn't line up with what the Anabaptists have to say about themselves. Like, they don't think this is true. They don't think that they are like a Reformation era offshoot or like a radical splinter group that fractured off of Zwingli's Reformation. And you see a subtle clue to this if you go to the Emmental today, if you go to the city of or the village of Longnau, and there is a Mennonite church there today, which claims to be the oldest continual Mennonite congregation in the world. And it says on it, I need to remember how it says this exactly. I think in German is Alt Evangelische Täufergemeinde, which would be something like old evangelical Anabaptist church. And Alt Evangelische in German is like expressing that, like evangelische would be in like it would refer to the Reformed tradition, basically. Evangelical, it's the same word. But saying alt evangelische means that like we're older than the Reformation, and this is something that the Anabaptists always believed about themselves. And when I was in I've been to Switzerland twice. I've been to this region where my own ancestors are from, where the Anabaptists are from, both in the Emmental and the Bernese Oberland. My ancestors are from the Oberland, which is generally home, like the ancestral home. This is a generalization. It's pretty murky around the edges, but in general, it's the Oberland is where the Amish originate from. But collecting the stories, like even today, there's a folk memory of who the Anabaptists were, and it doesn't line up with the, I guess you could say, the official narrative. And there's a number of reasons. So I'm just going to lay out like kind of the rough outline tonight, and in the ongoing series of videos on this subject, dive into these things in more detail. But kind of like the real brief version of the story, what you're going to hear in very old Anabaptist sources, but also what you're going to hear on the ground among the people that live in those regions today, is that no, the Anabaptists have nothing to do, like they did not originate with the Reformation. This is not a Reformation splinter group. These people instead represent, this is the way I heard it from the people, the Anabaptists represent the faith that was practiced in this valley or in these hills or in these woods or whatever, like the old faith that was practiced here before the Reformation. This is what they see the Anabaptist as representing, is like an older version of Christianity. And I'm going to tell you, like, there's actually a surprising degree of truth in that claim. Another way that they present that story is to say, well, the Anabaptists are actually, like the Swiss Anabaptists, the Bernese Anabaptists in particular, are actually Waldensians. They're from the Waldensians. And that might be a theory that if you've been involved at all in Anabaptist scholarship, you might have come across that theory. There's some nuance that has to be added with that. I'm going to do a video on the Waldensians in particular, and what the term Waldensian really connotates in the late medieval context, because how should I say this? Like, I think it's a tricky label, because on the one hand it does refer to a distinct group of people, but I think in parallel with certain similar terms that we might use today when referring to certain evangelical or charismatic movements in the United States and American Christianity, that sometimes these terms can be used to refer to a identifiable institution or group of people that are a distinct body, but other times they can be used more vaguely to refer to people that fall along, I guess, like a general tendency of beliefs or practices or activity. And I guess I would propose to you, and I'm going to defend this in a later video, that very often in a medieval context, a late medieval context, that's what Waldensian actually refers to. And I think if you understand Waldensian in the context of the Swiss Anabaptists to refer to that, like that scope of the term, then it really opens up a lot of dynamics as to what's going on in late medieval Central European, Alpine, South German, Rhineland, all this whole area, Christianity. And so like there's this very firm link between the Anabaptists and late medieval German mysticism. And so what I guess, just to kind of present the basis of my thesis tonight, is that's kind of what I'm saying, the Anabaptist story of themselves really points to this, that no, we originate from kind of this milieu of late medieval spirituality and mysticism that exerts itself at the time of the Reformation in a lot of different ways, and the Reformation is itself in Switzerland is connected with that, maybe in a more academic setting. And there's this sense in which what happens in the early to mid 16th century with what we identify as the Anabaptist movement um, is kind of several different forces colliding and mixing together and resulting in something that is both new and old at the same time. So there winds up being this movement emerging that very much sees itself not as a novelty, not as a radical movement that is like a complete rejection of the status quo or anything like that. Rather, something that sees itself fundamentally as a continuation of an older way of life and an older way of living the Christian faith. And I really want to get into this in more detail because I think there's something about this story that really helps us understand a lot about what happened to the West, in particular, a lot about what has happened in the emergence of modern Christianity and in the emergence of the modern world. Because on the one hand, what I want to propose to you that the Swiss Anabaptists specifically represent is a preservation of something that both the Catholics and the Protestants at the time of the Reformation were squeezing out of their Christianity. Um, a lot of people very correctly identify that some of the problems that Catholics or Orthodox people might want to pin on the Reformation, um, early modern Catholics did a lot of those same things, and Catholic nations have a lot of those same problems. And so I think this story in particular, the story of the Anabaptist, helps us to kind of understand what really happened, understand why it is that some of our narratives about the Reformation and the period following are overly simplistic and don't really capture the truth very well. I'm going to go ahead and hop over to the um, comment section and see if we got anything going on over here. So Atlee here, Atlee's a friend of mine. I was appreciate seeing you in the chat, Atlee. He has a comment here. He says, quite a few Amish claim the Waldensians as a link to the apostles. Perhaps I encountered this disproportionately, though, just defending my former self. Yeah, I think I don't know, kind of knowing your situation in particular. I'd love to have Atlee actually on the show sometime. He's got an interesting story. I think he would be interested in that as well. But I'm not gonna make any assumptions here live on the air and rope him into anything he doesn't want to do. But yeah, like I think on the one hand, it's hard to pin something down on the Amish and say all Amish have forgotten their own history or all Amish claim. What I would say is if you go back 150 years ago, I would feel like you can say all Amish would claim the Waldensians as an apostolic link. And so certainly if you go back and if you read Ernst Miller's book, it is, I think the title of that book is History of the Bernese Anabaptists. So he's focusing specifically on the Anabaptist of the canton of Bern, which was the people he knew. It's quite interesting what he has to say, and he's like writing in an era before, I guess you could say, before modernism has really overtaken the European Anabaptist communities. When these older versions of the stories are still around. So I think that'd be interesting for you and for others to read that. I would highly recommend that. But anyway, yeah, this is certainly the story that everybody would have told about themselves once upon a time. I think, with the exception of the Hutterites. I think the Hutterites have typically held to a narrative that they are legitimately the radicals of the Reformation, and I think in their instance that's actually correct, because again, like my overall claim, my overarching claim, I guess you could call it, is that who the Anabaptists actually are is kind of complicated. That they really are the mashing together of several different forces, um, and I think part of what that is the Anabaptists by the mid 16th century wind up this combination of kind of all of these things that were being forced out of the main line of the mainstream Reformation or Counter Reformation movements. I guess I'd like to take some of your questions. If you have any questions about the topic of tonight's video, I've presented the general thesis, the general idea that I wanted to lay out to you tonight, um, and give you I don't know, I'll give a little bit of time for Q&A on that, or if you have some other questions less directly related to that, we can get to those too. Obviously, I will prioritize ones that are topical for the video. And just once again, remind everybody to check out the links in the description. I do see a couple of comments in the chat asking about the pictures behind me. That these are icons, Orthodox icons. And if you want to know more about Orthodox icons, of course, you can check out some of the videos we've done here on this channel talking about icons and what's actually going on, and maybe dispelling some of the misunderstandings and myths people have about that. But I actually painted all these myself. I am an iconographer. So if you're an Orthodox Christian watching this and you'd like to order some icons, go ahead and check out my my link in the description. You can that's a way you can help support what we're doing here at the Sacred Life. I mean, I'm also planning on getting married in the coming spring. So if you want to help support me in getting married, you can do that as well. I'm just trying to guilt you into that. Anyway, checking out the rest of the comments here. I do have somebody asking if I censor my chat. I don't even know how to try to say your name. Under duress, I guess is what it says. You asked, do you censor your chat, like hiding, blocking, banning, timing out, etc.? If I have somebody that's like going off unhinged in the chat and I see that, and it's turning into a whole thing like I did last night, we had that, I'll block those guys. But for the most part, I want to like, if you're going off unhinged, somebody's going off on a rant and it's not really adding anything to the conversation, or doesn't even have anything to do with the conversation, and it's just distracting and detracting from the quality of the chat, then I'll block that. Or somebody's just saying things that are totally inappropriate, I'll block that. But I don't try to control the conversation. That's my attempt at saying your name, Jan Jates. That's my version. I know that's wrong, but I'm just going to call you Jan Jates. You asked, how would you convince a charismatic of the Eastern Orthodox position? Well, the first thing that I would say is that everything that you're looking for in charismatic Christianity, you will find in Orthodoxy. Like, sorry, he was saying that I nailed his my pronunciation of his name. That's good to know. Anyway, going on with your question, I would say, yeah, like I said, anything that you're seeking in charismatic Christianity, you will find in Orthodoxy. There are miracles in Orthodox Christianity, lots of miracles or miraculous experiences, deep, vibrant, very real, very powerful spiritual experiences. and like just like this acute awareness of spiritual conflict, spiritual warfare, all of these things, but like also very very solid and practical and useful and applicable teaching on all of these things, teaching that actually works. I'm speaking from experience here. um, there was some time in the past where I was kind of drawn to some of these more charismatic things because anybody who's around, I guess, the conservative Anabaptist world today is aware that charismatic Christianity has a strong pull on the conservative world. There's another number of reasons for that. But so I was around a lot of these things, drawn to them in some ways. Um, but what I would just say is like everything that's good about it is better in orthodoxy. Like that's so like I I'm not going to come out and say you guys are all washed up, you guys are all full of baloney, because I think charismatic Christians, Pentecostals, people like that are legitimately seeking after a good thing, which is something like a real, vibrant, powerful, and moving spiritual experience. And again, like what I'd say is that you're going to have that in Orthodoxy. Orthodoxy is not this dry, dead, rigid, formalized faith, even though it might appear that way on the surface to somebody on the outside. So you follow up about your girlfriend. You say your girlfriend has been a charismatic for a long time, but I've come to the Orthodox position through a lot of debate watching. She struggles with prayers to the saints, icons, and traditions. And I had somebody, maybe that was you, no, somebody else, Randy, earlier asked, do you pray to the saints? So that relates to your question here as well. Um, and what I would say is also first, yes, I do pray to the saints. And the reason I pray to the saints is because the saints aren't dead; the saints are alive, and because like what it means to be a Christian fundamentally is that we share in God's grace. We share in God's work, like the work that God is doing for the salvation of the world. So, like, it's not that we think that saints somehow are granted superpowers and they are clairvoyant, etc. Rather that we are like I, let me think how to say this in simple terms. Sorry, I can sometimes struggle to say simple things in simple terms. That's but it's that, yeah, like I said, that we share in the work that God is doing, and that is because God is love and he desires for us to share in that love. And that's why we pray to saints. It's part of why we pray to saints. It's not that we think that we have to go through somebody else to get to Christ, because we also pray directly to Christ. I mean, if you look at the icons behind me, you'll see the one in the most prominent position. Who is it? It's Christ. And even the Theotokos over here, Mary, the mother of God, the Virgin Mary, is almost always depicted with the infant Christ somewhere in the icon, because yeah, right. Anyway, um, I feel like I'm not getting to the point very well. Sorry about that, but I'm just trying to deal with this struggle of prayer to the saints. I understand this struggle. It's something I struggled with myself, but just understanding that, well, the saints aren't dead; they are alive in Christ. They've become partakers of Christ's life and resurrection. But then also understanding this concept that, well, what are we as Christians? What are we doing other than sharing in the work of Christ, other than sharing in the work of God? And so, like, it helped me to understand that by honoring Christ's saints and the work that he does through them, I am honoring Christ. And like the other, like vice versa is also true. Like if I'm not honoring Christ's saints, if I'm not honoring the work that he has done through these people that he has made holy, like they're not holy in the sense that like they are anything of themselves. Like we say in the divine liturgy, like before communion, we say something about the holy things are for the holy, and then immediately follow this up with the hymn, one is holy, one is God, Jesus Christ. Because everything that is holy because of Jesus Christ. And that's an important concept for us to understand. So like, I hope that helps you understand. Uh, I hope I'm saying that in at least a halfway coherent way. Um, how it is that like I kind of wrestled through that own process myself. As far as icons, I mean, really very similar. I've got some videos on I on saints as well, but on icons, I'm particularly interested in the icon subject. You can tell I've become an iconographer, coming from a very aniconic and even iconoclastic tradition myself. And then the other one you throw in there is tradition. Um, and I think there's a struggle a lot of people have, is that they've had drilled into their head that all tradition is bad tradition, like is somehow contrary to the Bible. um, and a big part of that is because of bad translations, honestly, because um, because there's like a single word in Greek. I wish I remember the word off the top of my head, that sometimes translators of the Bible will render with the word tradition whenever it's used negatively, and will render as something like teaching when it's used positively. But like Saint Paul, for example, does instruct us to keep to the traditions. The word used in Greek is rendered, the word that's the same word that's rendered as tradition. He does admonish us and teach us, hold fast to the traditions that have been delivered to you, whether by written word or by word of mouth. And so we say, as Orthodox Christians, that's what we're doing. There's, yeah, this is a whole complicated subject. But yeah, I'm just trying to give a brief rundown of that. So Daryl, you have a few comments here. First of all, you say, I'm from Ohio, and the Amish were like our neighbors. We would go over and spend money with them. Um, Even though a lot of my folks said they were racist, we understood they just lived separate lives. Um, Honestly, some Amish can be kind of, I wouldn't say that they're actually racist as much as like they're very naive about things. And I think that I don't know, they can come off in a certain way sometimes because yeah, they're just like living in this very isolated kind of life. But then you asked the question, bow not yourself. You were talking about when we were talking about the icons. You commented again. This is Daryl. Um, Daryl L. Cannon, bow not yourself to graven images, though. Then Jan Jates responds, icons aren't graven images. So yes, they're not graven images. Um, they're not graven images. Graven images are something else. I don't know how much I want to go into detail on this, but the reference to a graven image refers to something rather specific about the process of making an idol. And an idol is not merely a depiction of a pagan god, rather, it is an embodiment of a pagan god. When you're making an idol, you're making a body for a god. That's what pagans think that they're doing. If you read any pagan literature, you'll see that's what they think they're doing. If you study anything about pagan religion, pagan practice, don't bother with neo paganism. It's fake. It's not real. It hasn't, like, they have, yeah, that's, but, icons aren't graven images. There were icons in the tabernacle and in the temple. But a very, very, very important thing that's often overlooked about the second commandment, and you understand how this plays out if you keep reading the book of Exodus, is that God doesn't simply say, don't make any images. He says, don't make any images for yourselves. It's something like that. And there's really like a very, very, very important theological concept there. I talk about this in another video, and I want to talk about this some more. This is an idea I'm still working out how I wanted to present this exactly. But there really is something important, and this applies also. Like, for example, the way that we go about theology, the way that we try to depict things symbolically, and also depict things in image, which, like, an image is a certain type of symbolism. Um, but basically, what I'm arguing is that an important part of the second commandment is, like, it's not simply it's not a straightforward prohibition of all images, because you can't read it that way, because then God immediately turns around and violates his own commandments. um, instead instead, what's going on is God is teaching us we can't relate to God and to the divine according to symbols and ideas that are born out of our own imaginations. Instead, we must only relate to God by what is divinely revealed about him. And the reason I argue that that's how you should understand the second commandment is because what happens as you continue to read the book of Exodus and into Leviticus and Numbers and Deuteronomy, and then even further forward throughout the Old Testament and into the prophets, and this culminates in the incarnation of Christ, the incarnation of God in the flesh, is that God divinely reveals things to us, and those are the only things that we can trust in. And we see that, like, for example, God reveals to Moses to place the cherubim in the most holy place of the temple. God reveals to Moses to make the bronze serpent. Um, and there's all kinds of other things like this. But then like I said, this refers to more abstract sorts of symbols as well, like theological concepts, the sort of symbols that work out, like, through prophetic imagery, things like that. If you want a great kind of rundown of this idea, um, I would recommend going and reading Saint Dionysius the Areopagite, um, where he talks about symbols and how this works. So that's kind of my rundown on these things. Anyway, I'm not seeing any other questions. I appreciate the questions that you guys have had tonight. I hope this was a decent conversation. I enjoy doing these more historical dives, and stay tuned over the coming weeks. I guess Vince, you come in here with um, with a question here. You say, how does the radical Reformation justify an early apostasy given the promises of the new covenant church? Let me see if I understand your question correctly. I'm sorry, I'm not quite following. I think what you're asking is, I think what you're asking. Correct me if I'm misunderstanding. I think what you're asking is, like, relating to previous videos, previous discussions that we've had, about, like, why I personally believe any teaching about an early apostasy in the church, or things like, um, Eastern Orthodoxy or things like that being complete apostasy. And this is something like things that I've talked about against restorationism. Yeah, there you go. You clarify where he says, yeah, like how I believe, Jesus is saying these things won't prevail against it. So you're asking, how do the believers in a radical Reformation uh, type of uh, type of teaching justify these promises? What I would say is, when I believed in these things, I didn't really have any, how would I say this? I really didn't have any understanding that what I believed was actually in conflict with scripture. And I think this is, I don't know, I think this is a common thing for any of us, because I don't know. This is one of the reasons why I think we need something like Holy Tradition. We need something like a divinely instituted church that like actually has an earthly continuity and divine authority, like the indwelling of the Holy Spirit in it. Something that God can very clearly point us to and say, here is where I have placed my truth. Because when like no matter how smart we are as people, when we're coming to something like this, like scripture and the shape of reality itself, like this is a concept that's far too big for us. And so that's kind of my, I don't know, my assessment of it is that one of the reasons why I went from the position that I used to hold, which would have been closer to a restorationist type of, like, not exactly a restorationist, but more of a radical Reformation type of viewpoint, to now being an Orthodox Christian, is because I began to see, like, well, there are holes in this way of thinking, and I guess that's kind of my answer to your question. Is I think that's a pretty glaring hole in the radical Reformation way of thinking. Um, And Daryl Cannon, you responded earlier. You said, "Hey, you're the theologian." I want to say, no, I'm not a theologian. I like to always point that out. I'm not a theologian. I try to avoid presenting myself as a theologian. I'm not really even an apologist either. When rather, what I want to do on the Sacred Life here is throw ideas out there, have conversations about it, and I don't know, sometimes be wrong publicly, because we're trying to explore these questions. I'm trying to grow in my own faith, and hopefully, you all are along for the ride. And it can, I don't know, we can stumble together. Hopefully, stumble in the right direction. That's the There are a few other questions, but I guess they're bigger questions. I'm not trying to dodge your questions, but it's a little bigger than I want to deal with right now. I think I'm about ready to wrap up. I guess if you really want me to answer this question, goated 6x, tune in at a later time. Maybe I'll get to that sometime. Maybe I'll even just, I don't know. Maybe I'll get to those questions some other time. But for right now, I think I'm ready to sign off. I feel like we had a good stream tonight. I enjoyed you all being here once again. Until next time, hope you guys all have a good weekend. I guess goated. You say right now you're pretty. Looks like you're having fun there in the chat. Well, I'm glad you're having fun, but I'm afraid I'm not going to get to those questions right now. So I hope you find somebody else that's willing to help you out there. But anyway, until next time, I want to wish you all once again peace in Christ.